Welcome to John the Recruiter Podcast. I'm happy to welcome my first guest, Dr. Anthony Stoneburg. Welcome to the JTR Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. A little introduction on Dr. Anthony Stoneburg. He has over 30 years in recruiting leadership and recruiting experience, to include 30 of those years in the United States Army. Thank you for your service to our country. In 2018, you retired as the Command Sergeant Major for the United States Army Recruiting Command. Some of your awards and decorations include the Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal, among many others. Since your retirement and transition, you held positions as Director, Talent Acquisition, and Senior Technical Recruiter. So I was fortunate enough to meet you while we were both deployed into Afghanistan around 2010. And we spent around a year together in Afghanistan. And I learned from our time together about your passion for recruiting and your relentlessness to be successful, and also the same for the people that you led, which impressed me tremendously. And it developed our friendship and that we kept throughout the years. And I'd like to start off by, if you could tell us by letting us know how you got there and became the Command Sergeant Major of the United States Army Recruiting Command, which we know as USAREC, and give us a little bit of background about that, and just giving us about Dr. Anthony Stoneburg, who I know as Stoney.
Stoney. Hey, let's go with Stoney. Doctor's all too long. No, I appreciate you having me, John, aka Master Chief. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. So my recruiting journey started back in 1994, actually 93. So I enlisted in the Army right out of high school. I was a communications guy. And then I decided after my first son was born, I actually got out of the Army at ETS and went into a reserve unit. While I was there, I discovered the Active Guard Reserve program, I think what you guys call TAR, and applied for the AGR program. So a couple months go by, and I got a phone call which says, "Hey, I got great news and I got not so good news." I said, "Okay, what's the not so good news?" Not so good news is that your job, your MOS, your military occupational specialty, does not exist in the AGR program. But the great news is that you could be an Army recruiter. So it was a way back into the Army. So I took it, and then in May of 1994, I reported to the Army Recruiter course in Fort Bend, Harrison, Indiana. When I graduated, I never dreamed, never fathomed, some 22 years later, that I would be selected to be the Command Sergeant Major of that organization. It's a very humbling experience, and very grateful for it. So I started my Army recruiting career in 94 in just outside of D.C., southeast D.C., to the Prince George's County, Maryland, called District Heights. Very unique area. And I learned a lot. And then in 1999, I actually ETS from the reserves and transitioned back to active component, because at that time they were not allowing AGR soldiers to have leadership positions, and I wanted to be station commander, I think the rank recruiter in charge of the station. So I transitioned back to the regular Army. And in 2003, I got selected to be a first sergeant. So they moved me out to Las Vegas, Nevada, which was a great learning experience. No one moved to Vegas to join the Army, but it was a great experience. And then from there, I went to the Sergeant's Major Academy as a non-select for Sergeant Major, just as an extra, because they had extra seats to fill because of the war in Iraq at that time. So then after that, I moved to Newark, New Jersey, to be the first sergeant of the Newark Recruiting Company. And I did that for a while. And then I became the brigade senior master trainer, which is responsible for all the training events in the Northeast. And then while I was there, I took a course on the ADDI process, the ADDI training model. And I became so passionate about it and so involved with it that actually they moved me to the recruiting school to teach the senior master trainer course, utilizing the ADDI model. So that is when I got selected to go to Afghanistan, where I got to meet the one and only John Cox. We spent our time there. So I know you were in charge of the medical recruiting. We had a team in charge of the Afghan Army, and my responsibility was the NCOIC of the Afghan National Police. So yeah, we got to travel a lot, got to see a lot. Recruiting and sourcing in Afghanistan a little bit different than what we do in the States. You pull in that little green truck, say, "Hey, get in the truck." A little bit different here, but yeah. While we were there, I had the honor, I was selected for Sergeant Major and returned to the States. You were at my promotion ceremony, which I'm very grateful for, as were, many of our peers. So then I got back to the States and they moved me to Kansas City as the operations sergeant major, which at that time was a newer position because we were having non-79 Romeos come in as the CSMs in some battalions. So anyway, I got selected. After that, became the battalion command sergeant major for the Sacramento recruiting battalion. I was there for about a year. About the 10-month mark, I got notified that, hey, another good news. I had asked to go to Los Angeles battalion, and the Army being the Army, said LA. So their definition of LA was Lower Alabama. I got selected to be a sergeant major in Montgomery. Then like a month later, I got a call saying, hey, you were an alternate for the brigade, so now you're going to go be the command sergeant major of recruiting and retention school. And by the way, we're moving it to Fort Knox, Kentucky. So that was exciting. We moved there, and then there, about 4 or 5 months in, I guess about 5 months in, we had a new commanding general, Jeffrey J. Snow. And at that time, actually in May of 2015, he selected another sergeant major to be his command sergeant major. I won't use the name because to protect his privacy, but a great man, great sergeant major. I worked with him previously. He's a peer of mine, a mentor of mine. But unfortunately, some things happened, and he was not able to take the position, so they reposted it. And by the time that happened, I had enough time at the brigade position to be and competed for the nominative and got selected to compete at nominative. So I got interviewed. So November of 15, 5 of us were interviewed for the job. 2 79 Romeos, 3 non-79 Romeos. 79 Romeo being the recruiter MOS, and he put me through the ringer, man. I got to tell you, it was he was testing me on a couple of different levels. It was very entertaining. And then he called me. I got called someone to his office, and when I got in there, I don't think I shared this with you before, but the USAREC sergeant major was in there, the CG was in there, and the deputy commanding general. So I'm like, oh man, I must have really messed up this time. They got the CSM in here to make sure I don't do anything crazy. Great man, Willie Clemens. And then he said, Stoney, or sergeant major, said, hey, I want you to be the next USAREC sergeant major. And like my heart dropped, man. I was like, I was surprised I didn't break down bawling. So I thanked him for the opportunity, and he told me we'd work out the details. And then I walked outside, and my wife called because she wanted to know what happened. I said, well, I'll just meet you at the house. I was trying to sound a little down. And she came in the door about 10 minutes later. She goes, what happened? I said, hug the next USAREC sergeant major. So yeah,
that's right. Yeah, you're either getting a promotion or a demotion when you walk into those offices.
Yeah, I tell you, man, I thought for a while there he was making it so tough that I thought they were really going to find a way to make me retire. So, but yeah, it worked out, and I had the honor to serve there as the USAREC sergeant major for 2.5 years. There was actually an offer they wanted me to stay a little longer because they didn't want him and I to both leave at the same time. But by that time, we'd already made the decision to retire and transition and move down here to sunny, beautiful Florida. So, yeah, here we are. Yeah, that's my Army recruiting story.
Awesome. Well, and what people might not realize is when you're the command sergeant major for the U.S. Army recruiting, you're talking over 13,000 soldiers. And I can't even imagine what the goals are. The numbers might change, but it's a monthly goal, the pressures and driving, for not only just the enlisted goals, but officer goals and everything. How do you manage that as a leader?
You have a lot of help. So our annual mission between the active, so the Army Recruiting Command is responsible for the active and Army Reserve mission. But you also have to build the delayed entry pool, which So our annual mission between the active, the reserve, the DEP, medical was about 120 to 123,000 a year. We have 6 brigades. Sorry, there's 6 brigades. So each one of those brigades has a commander and has a sergeant major. There's 44 recruiting battalions with a battalion commander and a sergeant major. You got 440 something, recruiting first sergeants, couple recruiting companies with commanders and first sergeants. And then you have 1,500 stations that are geographically dispersed around the globe. I mean, I had soldiers in Europe, Germany. I had soldiers in Korea, Japan, Okinawa, soldiers in Guam, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. So it was a lot. My focus then was really to get them. I wanted them to know, Roosevelt Theodore Roosevelt had a quote one time and said, "People only care how much you know when they know how much you care." I had a leader share that with me early in my career, and it stuck with me. So my goal was to visit every recruiting battalion in that time. 44 may not seem like a lot, but the part that most people don't know is the other requirements placed on me by people above me, right? So I had to go to the Pentagon every month and brief the Army leadership, the Secretary of the Army, the Undersecretary, the Chief of Staff, the Vice Chief, the Army G1, the Army G2. We briefed them every month on recruiting. So that we had to go do that. Plus we had other engagements. So it was, the actual time I had available to schedule my own activities there, I wasn't with the CG, the CG or doing something else was kind of challenging. So I made it to all but one. But I just wanted them to have a face. I wanted them to know that I truly believed I worked for them. There was no E10 board, so there was no more promotions, right? So I wanted to know I was not just a picture on the wall, but, somebody that actually did care about them and wanted to, do my part to help them.
Yeah. And I know that we have talked before in recruiting, and when you transitioned, we talked about all the training you get in the military. And then when you transition to civilian, you just don't see that training there. And that is one thing me and you talked about is how do we instill that training into the civilian world? And we both did that with some recruiters we know, but how valuable was that training you got as you went through your career and then you transitioned to the civilian?
It was invaluable. Yeah, great point. When I became the director of talent acquisition for the company here in Central Florida, I had 3 recruiters and I hired a new one. And one had 15 years of recruiting experience, but 2 of them were brand new. They had never done recruiting before. They had HR degrees or bachelor's of science in business administration, focused on HR, but there was no school or training that teaches you how to be a recruiter, right? They show up and like, well, how do we do this? So you teach them. But what I used was all the different techniques and procedures that we learned, from the Armor Recruiter course to the Station Commander course to the First Sergeant course to the Sergeant Major course. All those tools that you pick up along the way, I just convert them into civilian terminology, and so this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to track, and this is how we're going to be successful. And it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and it seems like some of the basics that we taught in the military, it's easy to convert over because it's really the same principles too.
Yeah, it was. We went back a year ago to USAREC headquarters. They invited all the senior leaders back, and we talked. And I think some of my peers were surprised that in the civilian world we keep more metrics than I did in USAREC. They want conversion data. They want to know how many people it takes you to source to get to a phone screen, to get to a business phone screen, to get to an on-site interview, to get hired. They track it, and then part of your annual compensation review is based on how those numbers, right? Do you have good numbers or not good numbers? And similarly, in the Army, we had metrics against each part of the process. In the civilian world, we have the same thing. You try to beat that conversion data. You try to be better than those ratios. So that, work smarter, not harder. But yeah, the training was invaluable. The leadership that I learned was invaluable. It's just I don't know how you become a recruiter without ever being trained. But I know people do, and they're very successful. But I think those are just ones who have a passion for it. But I think there's a difference between those that have been trained respectfully and those who they might want training, but they're not getting it. So there was a statistic one time that like 80% of salespeople don't receive formal training. I don't know how do you go about, because really as a recruiter you're selling the company you work for, right, or selling that position. I don't know how it's difficult without training.
Yeah, and I talk in one of my earlier episodes about recruiters that wing it. They just go. It's like you got to have a plan, you got to have training. And I say like pick the best recruiter, see what they're doing, and if you have that training, it's going to make you better. And if you keep sharpening those skills, we talk about that in the military, and I think all services do. Sharpen your skills.
Yeah.
My son's in the military now, and all he talks about is before they deploy, they constantly train. And you did it. I did it. We always were training. And that's what I tried to instill when I led recruiters at my civilian company is we always got to train, because if you do that, you'll always get better. And I know you did that also.
You train for the fight, right? So obviously the civilian world a little bit different. You train in the military to go to battle potentially or to do your job somewhere else. But you gotta, I still train, even with all the years of experience I have, I'm getting too old, but I still take classes online or do, other training just to stay sharp. One of the 7 habits of highly effective people, right? Sharpen the saw. You got to, I believe that you have to have continuous learning. I didn't start my doctorate until I was in my, I was over 50 years old. I got bored at work. I was working for this company that will remain nameless. They're all stressed. I think I'm bored. I went back to school and got my doctorate in 2.5 years. So it's you. I also wanted to show my children, you're never too old to learn. You're never too old to get better.
Yeah, and plus there's always changes in your career field, and you want to keep up with the changes. And I see it in recruiting. Everybody's trying to go to AI. Everybody's trying to look for the new best platform, what's happening. And if you don't keep up with that, you're going to get lost.
Very true. One thing that time has taught me is that there's never been one singular method that everybody responds to. So absolutely AI is very important. It helps you with sourcing. One of the challenges I had before I left Army recruiting is everybody wanted to go to be a social media recruiter. Okay, I think adding social media as a method of prospecting is great, but the reality is you can't just rely on that one method. You still have to go to high school visits. You still have to call people. You still have to go do face-to-face prospecting because not everybody is on social media. I mean, it's when you rely on it and you don't have the knowledge or the capability, it's not effective. I have older children, but my youngest son is getting ready to graduate here in 2 months. He made it through 4 years of high school and never saw an Army recruiter, never saw a Navy recruiter, never heard from an Army recruiter, never heard from a Navy recruiter. He had one, where he saw one Marine recruiter at school. He's in the Marines, always loved the school, but that's it. I mean, so great, you're using social media as your prospecting method, but you're missing qualified talent because you're not using all. I'm a firm believer you gotta sprinkle it across all, right? You gotta find what works for you, but also which method has your highest contact percentage. One of the things I learned, as a recruiter is I learned that if I could, I monitored what time of the day people answered their phone, what time of the day seniors answered their phone, what time of the day can I catch a senior at school, when can I catch them at the mall, wherever they were. You keep data, so it's not that people think, well, you just love data. No, I want to work smarter. I had a family at home. I wanted to go home and see my kids. So I knew if I could prospect for 1 hour using this lead source, it would be more productive than 5 hours of this other lead source. So it's, you have to use multiple and see which works, but you just can't rely on one. I think one of the reasons, the Army right now is struggling is because they're trying to get too far advanced and they're not keeping the basics. You got to have advertising. You got to have supporting fire. You got to have the, recruiters in the school. You got to have awareness. And the nation right now doesn't have awareness. They don't know, we're changing the Army, changing uniform again. Like, pick one. The Army has an identity issue, and I think it all stems from trying to focus in one area where you have to focus in that.
And I see that in other services too, but I also see that in civilian companies where they concentrate on, okay, we're going to do just all in on LinkedIn or all in on Indeed, and they don't spread throughout other platforms, and they don't go to career fairs. They don't go, hey, let's go out to other things. Like, hey, no one goes to competitors anymore. To ask a recruiter, hey, go out and meet people. It's almost like you're asking them to do something where it's against HR policy. And it's like, hey, let me teach you how to do this. And then when I taught my recruiters, it's like I taught them a brand new thing. But, those are skills that, like, if a recruiter gets them, they're going to be an outstanding recruiter.
I agree. You just off the top of my head, I can think of 4 or 5 different platforms I use when I source for the jobs I do now. I remember when I was at the director of talent acquisition for this company, one of the vice presidents says, well, you got to use, one of like Indeed or something, or Glassdoor. You got to use Glassdoor. Glassdoor is the best. I was okay, but these cost us money. So what I was able to do is I tracked, input to output, right? I tracked how much money we spent for memberships in these different platforms and what the return was, and found so when my boss said, well, they want you to try, recruiter.com or whatever it is, I said, well, these are the statistics from each of the different platforms that we use, and this is where we get our biggest bang for our buck. So do you want me to go, I could waste money in this other one, or we could put more money into the ones that, that get a positive return. But again, that's why tracking data is so important. Just because it's not to say what you did or didn't do, it's so that this is what's effective so we can become more effective.
Yeah, and that analysis is important so you know, because if you're going to help your company and you're going to save your company money along with getting better results, it's going to help your team, because maybe it could be the difference of, hey, we hire more recruiters to help you, or, if someone's in a pinch and needs a position fast, you know where to go to get that, find those candidates. So that's why that analysis helps you too. And it's funny that all this stuff you're saying these are things I've been saying in my podcast, and we think alike, and we went to different schools, but it's the same teaching. So recruiting is not rocket science. It's just basic principles. And that's all it is. And it's, we've talked earlier about it's a numbers game. If I call 10 people and they all say no, what happens if I call another 10? Eventually I'm going to get a yes. And then I know, okay, I call 30 people, I get one yes. So if I call another 30, I'm going to get another yes. Yeah. So that's how I base my day on, well, I got to call 30 people to get one. And if I need 3, well, I got to call 90. So all those numbers will work out. And if you're calling people, or if I'm going out on the road, whatever those numbers are, that's how you're going to build your prospect.
Absolutely. And the only training I did, one of the other things that worked for me was, the data analysis, right? I had a sergeant major teaching one time about required work ethic. How many hours? It's a formula that I won't bore everybody with, but there's a mathematical formula that says output, effort to result, expected result, right? It's not guaranteed, but this kind of gives you a baseline and where to start. So that's what I planned out, the number of hours per month I needed to prospect to get the output that I needed. The other thing was, I think I shared this with you previously, but April 7th, the year 2000, I had a significant emotional event, right? I went to a training. The Zig Ziglar Corporation provided me personality trait training, and that just rocked my world, right? Because what I found was I went back into the analysis. I was basically communicating the way I wanted to be communicated with, and I was only hitting about 25% of my candidates. So the training didn't tell me I needed to change how I communicate, but it did tell me is how I change how I communicate with other people based on their personality. All right, so you and I have similar personalities. We want the bottom line. We have that dominant style. That's why we communicate so well. But there's 4 different major personality types, and I'm not going to get into the training, but once I learned how to communicate based on how they worked on their personality traits, it changed me as a leader, as a father, as a husband. I gave it to all my kids. I gave it to my dad. I gave it to pick this class. Let me tell you what you are. But it worked. So that in combination, knowing how to communicate and knowing how many people you got to communicate with, in 2001, my station, we were the number 1 station in the recruiting command. I was station commander of the year for USAREC, not because of my efforts, but because of the efforts of the team that I was with. And it was all based on, I learned how to utilize them better because I took into account their personality and how they communicated. And it worked wonders.
And sometimes in leadership, people don't realize that once you learn and take care of your people, they'll take better care of you than if you drive them and beat them like a racehorse or whatever. It's just getting to know your people and taking care of them.
Yeah, there's a peer of mine I knew one time that he used to have like a referee flag, right? And it was red. And he would just, he was just walking out of his office and toss the flag into the middle of the floor. And that meant you got to start prospecting. Everybody was smiling and dialing. That's not the way you're successful, right? I mean, that's an ego, in my opinion. But you got to treat people with dignity and respect, and you got to work with them. Leadership is not always easy, but it's part of your job. So it's part of what makes us successful, right? I didn't make sergeant major because of things I did. I was selected based on the efforts of a lot of people and a lot of mentors along the way.
Yeah. So what gets you really motivated about recruiting?
Man, the passion I have is finding the right person for the right job at the right time. It's like an adrenaline rush. I got this new rec not too long ago, and I found there's an MOS in a specific military branch that matches. Man, I couldn't wait to get some candidates. I was this is good. They're going to be working this is going to be great. It's just finding the right person at the right time for the right job. It just motivates me. It always has. I love the stress. I love the stress of it. In the Army, when you have a recruiting mission or goal of so many, and it's the Friday before the end of the month, and you still need 2. I'm going to get them, and they're going to be at MIPS on Monday. It's just that passion. I want to do what's right for the organization. I want I want to earn my keep, so to speak, but I just love finding people and finding the right job for them.
And I think great recruiters, that's what they're going to miss most, is that challenge that you get from being a recruiter. Is, I always say, like, when people say, I talk about one of my podcasts, the unicorn position, the one that no one can find. That's the ones I want to go after. Because even if you try and you fail a couple times, but when you find one, that's what everybody remembers.
Oh, and finding the unicorn makes you better at finding horses, right?
Yes.
So it's, we had a position in the Army called thoracic surgeon, right? And those are a unicorn, right? So trying to go find one of them there's only like 200 registered in the United States or some crazy like that. So you don't know how to dig for that unicorn. Go and find somebody to be, to work at, another organization is pretty simple. Well, not simple, but I would say easier.
So with your passion, I talk about being relentless. What advice would you give to people about how do you be relentless in recruiting?
I think it boils down to just passion, right? Recruiting has to be something that you have a passion for. You have to have a passion for people. If you want to be relentless, in the Army, it was easy, right? You wanted to be relentless because, one of my leaders early on said, if we don't fill these jobs, there's a platoon that has to deploy that's undermanned. There's a company that's going somewhere that's not 100%. So you never wanted to let your battle buddies, your peers down. So the relentless drive was to make sure we manned and staffed the Army to the level it needed every day. And that it boiled down or trickled down all the way to every recruiter in the Army. You got to do your part to fulfill, mainstream, the operational force. Where I'm at now with Amazon, it's to say, I want to drive to make sure those hiring managers have the positions they need because it's important work, right? And it impacts me as an employee. One of the big things now for Amazon is Project Kuiper, right? Putting 3,200 satellites into the atmosphere to provide internet to low-income areas around the world. They need engineers for that. They need integration engineers. They need software engineers. They need all kinds of people. Otherwise, that project could fail, and that's a lot of it's an ability to help a lot of people globally, and that's just the passion. So my advice is you got to find somewhere where you have a passion to help those people, and you got to really want to work. Recruiting is not easy. You got to get used to the word no. But if I want to hear no, I just go ask somebody in my family, hey, do something for me. No, just kidding. Yeah. You got to be used to the word no, and you got to be okay with no. Because like you said, 99 no's means one yes is coming.
That's right.
You just got to have a passion to help others. You got to have a passion to fill those positions to help your hiring manager because you're really a liaison between the exterior customer and the interior customer, right? You got to know I heard one of your podcasts about knowing the needs of the hiring manager. You got to know those needs to find the right candidate to fill those positions. It's got to be your passion. You got to love doing it. If
That's
not,
awesome.
then maybe not for you.
Yeah, great answer. Well, I thank you for being my first guest.
My pleasure.
I love you as a brother. I can't wait to see you again to share that adult beverage. I want to thank everybody for listening and to the JTR podcast, and stay motivated and be relentless.